But this time I don't have the extra 20 minutes, so I'd better get started. Fortunately, some of that you've seen this slide 3 times already, so I won't read it up to you. But my talk is about really these two, or really the last one. What are we thinking currently we'll do about user interfaces when you want to write cross-platform applications? And we really think the feeling is getting stronger and stronger that the cross-platform part of this is going to be done in HTML, JavaScript. Skip over these and get straight to the beef. So the Dyalog supported user interface technologies today are, of course, still Win32. So if you're on Windows and you think that's going to, you like the functionality that you're getting from QuadWC, there is still no reason at this time to feel that you need to do anything to move on. You might want to, if you want to take advantage of some of the features, the new widgets, so you want to build a web server or so on. But there's no risk that this technology is going to disappear. We continue to do work on it. We've recently, in 14.1, we added support for touch screens and high DPI screens. So we're updating the technology to keep up with what's changing out there. But of course, the underlying platform itself, Microsoft's Win32 APIs, are no longer changing. Microsoft is doing nothing to add them, and is starting to do things to remove them from certain platforms, certain types of Windows servers, and so on. If you want to deploy something on the cloud in corporate environments, it's slowly getting harder to do. Then we have the new Windows technology that Microsoft has been pushing hard on the desktop and is now focusing their efforts on the universal Windows platform, which is really the thing that's built for mobile phones and tablets and so on, but which Microsoft is also putting on the desktops and saying, well, if you use this XAML-based technology, you'll be able to, and you stay within the Microsoft world, you'll be able to use that. So anything you learn with going to Michael Hughes' workshops on WPF, we think you'll be able to transfer most of those skills, and we have the UWP version of APL you can carry right on using, with small changes to your tool. But what I'm really going to focus on now is the HTML5 JavaScript My Server, to be very specific, and the Sync Fusion controls that we bundle with that, right? So we made this deal with Sync Fusion last year, where they have some WPF controls that we bundle with APL. They also have JavaScript controls that we're building into the My Server. The My Server has been a long time coming. The earliest presentations on it, I think, probably done by Stefano nearly a decade ago, and he started working on the technology that eventually became My Server. It was a bit too object-oriented for my taste. I built something called Mild Server, and then Brian came on board and took over. We had a version that a number of customers are actually using in anger at the moment. And now finally, I think My Server has come of age. We have a version that we think everybody can play with. Each one of these was, I think, usable to a slightly larger group of you than the one before. And we're hoping now that with version 3, we really have something that you can all play with. So exactly what is My Server? Well, I think I'd like to start by saying, hopefully referring to a technology that you're all familiar with. What is QuadWC? Well, QuadWC is essentially a set of classes, though when it was implemented they had these text names like form. Dyalog APL didn't know about classes at the time. So you refer to them with these names. So here's a little UI written in QuadWC. We create a form with a caption Hello World, with a size. We create a label, an edit field, a button. We put an event on the button to say if somebody presses the button, call this function. And the callback function sets the text property of the result label to have this text. And My Server is in fact now in My Server 3 very much the same thing. It's a set of classes for creating user interfaces. So you create a form with a title, you add a label, you have the ability to attach the label to the edit field that you create. So this label is for name. Create an edit field with this name. attach a callback to the button. And there's a slight the slight differences are in that you don't say what the positions are in pixels and so on. It's based on CSS styling and flowing, sort of the same kind of technology as WPF. And the callback function, we don't have any form of data binding. We're actually replacing a little piece of what's on the screen. We're replacing this HTML div here with a paragraph containing it. So there's some slight changes in it, but essentially you should be able to think about it in the same way. So we can, just showing the same stuff again as sort of a Rosetta code thing. Creating the form and adding a title, very much the same. In fact, the My Server things are typically a little bit shorter, a little bit simpler to create these two user interfaces. Okay, let's take a look at it. So I'm going to click on this. This doesn't actually go to that link. That link isn't up yet. It will be up shortly after the conference. It's using a copy of My Server that's actually running installed on my laptop. And what we've decided to do for My Server to help you learn it is that all the documentation is actually part of this demo web page that we shipped. So the documentation about how to build a My Server is all going to be in this tree structure up here. So you can click on one of these. At the moment, it hasn't been. This is work in progress, but there's going to be documentation here. There's descriptions of techniques. There's test applications. There's links to both internal Dyalog resources, where to download the My Server from GitHub. There's a forum section in our forums for My Server, blog entries, and then there are external resources on how to use the underlying technologies. We've done everything we can to make it possible for you to do this without knowing about HTML and JavaScript. But if you want to build something that really looks flashy, you're probably going to want to move beyond the edges of what we have done, and then we link to all that documentation. So, for example, all of the controls that we have, all of the widgets are listed in a tree structure here. They're divided into dialog controls, which are things similar to form and the stuff that you have in QuadWC, where dialog created objects covering the underlying Win32 controls. So an example of that would be, see if I can, my loudspeaker is probably not, I should have hooked up for this. There's an audio control, for example. And so there's a little sample like this for every control. If you go down here and ask to see the source code for that, it shows you the code required to use that widget for this example. So here that's just adding the text was up and duck, and then adding an audio control with the file quack.mp3. A slightly more normal example might be a button. You press the button, it does something, and you've got the code down here. So we're hoping that you'll be able to cut and paste samples from this directly into your code. In addition to this set of core controls that we've built, the most important ones are going to be the covers that we're building for the SyncFusion widgets. So SyncFusion has something like 100 different widgets that they provide for JavaScript now. And we're going through those and picking the most important ones first. Supporting each one of those requires writing about a page of code. And we could do with some help from some of you contributing on GitHub for some of the more esoteric ones. We're going to go after the bread and butter ones like date picker we've done. So this is one of the widgets they provide in the classical calendar thing. They have a grid object, which allows you to page through data, filter it, search it, all the kind of stuff that you would expect to put into a grid object. So in addition to browsing these objects, you can also search. So you can search for information. What is there about dates, for example? And it'll bring up a list of samples that have something to do with dates. There's one here that uses, 2 calendars. That's what I was looking for. I want to build some kind of hotel registration system. So you can see the conference registration system next here. The drop-in is going to be using technology like this. There's not a lot of test applications yet. This is stuff that we're going to be working hard, and we've got up to 4 people working on this now. So you should see this grow really rapidly up to Christmas time. It's all, it's all very usable now if you can make do with the controls that are there. But the number of samples will grow rapidly. So there's an idiom search, for example. It's your favorite snippet of APL code. Mine is the 2 fighter aircraft flying past each other. And so there's a little application to search the FinAPL idiom library, for example. There's a kid's keyboard if you need to learn how to pronounce Hebrew letters. No points for guessing who implemented that one. One of the challenges here is to give you access to building user interfaces on top of these technologies using just APL classes with constructor arguments and so on that are really easy to use. So you say, make me a button, here's the caption, give me a callback. But of course, JavaScript and the styling technologies have an enormous range of features. You could spend an entire lifetime becoming an expert in those. One of the criticisms we've had for the Quad WC system is that although we made it very easy for you to build applications that stayed within those classes, if you needed to do something like, I think a typical example was if you wanted to build a grid with sortable columns and you needed to put those little triangles into them, there were people who spent a significant part of their lives hacking the Win32 API, finding out how to draw little triangles on top of our grid. And you could sort of get that to work, and then new release of Dyalog APL would come along and it would stop working. And then I think now we've got the property right on the grid. Eventually we did that. But it's a trap we really wanted to avoid falling into here. So we've tried to design this in such a way that the people who don't want to know HTML, JavaScript can just use those controls. So we've we've got the core controls. We're trying to say these are the things we think you really need to learn about. But there's also under all here, you can go into HTML, and we've got objects for every one of the, 110, 20 HTML elements. So if you really want to get lost in HTML and JavaScript, you have every opportunity to do that. And so here's an example of we just Googled something on, somebody said there's this graphics package called D3 that you should be looking at as a future replacement perhaps for Sharpplot. It does all kinds of animations and stuff. So we Googled it, and we looked at D3, and we thought it was a little bit hard to work with. But then we found something called dimple. And dimple is something like very similar to Sharpplot, built on, well, I don't know if it's similar to Sharpplot, the same kind of idea. And it does all these animations and things. And so we went to the dimple site and we saw this thing, and I thought, I've got to be able to build one of those into an APL application. Despite the warning there, this is from the dimple site. They say, remember, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So this combines pie chart and ring charts and animation for the time dimension. So this is 7-dimensional data which is being presented to the user. I think probably not in a particularly useful form, right? You can try and hover over these, but then they move. That's all. But the point is, we went to the internet and we found dimplejs.org, of course, and on there we found this example. And look, there's the JavaScript code which sets up, things looking very much like Sharpplot or whatever, graphics package setting, measure axes and axis bounds and so on. And we thought, well, Brian will implement a little object to cover that after the user meeting, but we only have a few days left to the user meeting, and I really desperately want to show this example. So what you can do, if you click on the logo here, so when you're in the home page, you can say, I want to see the source code, there's a checkbox. When you're on any other page in the example server, you can click on the Dyalog logo over here, and it shows you the source code. And this just says, chart is a new div containing the script, and then an APL function called script follows. And script follows is a very nasty piece of code that I think we need to turn into some kind of primitive very quickly. And we'll be talking with Phil Last about that tomorrow. So script follows just looks at all the commented lines following the line where script follows appears and returns that as a character vector. And that just injects this JavaScript directly into the page. Yeah? But you could see how you could very easily in APL turn this into an object now, where you take this character vector and you replace pieces of the string to add your own data. It's loading the data from something called example-data.tsv, which is a tab-separated variable file. And what we found, I mean, I think one of the really important things about working with JavaScript is we found it extremely easy to build APL covers on top of any new widgets that we needed to work with. You know, it'd be a few hours work for each one. Clearly, there's, as with any utility library, there's important design work to be done to turn it into something that will be truly useful to an APL programmer. But the technology, JavaScript has nothing to do with Java. It's a dynamic language, very similar to APL. It only has one numeric data type. You can leave the number as a number, and it's completely dynamic. And it's very, very fast because it's the bread and butter of all web servers. So Google and Microsoft and everybody else spent huge amounts of money optimizing it. So most of those covers that we have built for the HTML or Syncfusion object consist of really creating a few lines of JavaScript to call those objects and make them easily available to you. Okay. So we actually, at this conference, I'm really happy to see, I think these are these MyServer 2 based presentations, I think. The people have been playing, or maybe Roy's on 3. Yeah. Oh, right. So we have 2 presentations, actually. There's a game with ants, animated animals, which I'm told runs faster than the Quad WC equivalent, which is interesting. There's Steve Mansour's statistical work that he presented last year, which has now been given a MyServer UI. I've been involved in a few days project prototyping a user interface for a completely new insurance application that I've been allowed to show, since it's really only showing off my UI design skills. So there's an application here for setting the configuration. This is just to show you a few controls, that I can build something non-trivial. So this application starts out just with a combo box. When I pick the type of growth assumption that I want to work with, it populates some other things. I can pick a column and a value, and it's selected some policies from my policies in force. And then it's got a user interface here where I've got a tree structure of all the divisions of the data in my policies in force. I could pick a sub-selection of this data here, and then I could select a growth assumption. And I can assign, I want to use this growth assumption for this sub-selection of my policies in force. It's a modeling application. It has a little editable grid here, so I can change one of these values to 7. And when I save it, it's using dimple to produce this graph, and of course that value there was enormously out of range. we go. So I mean, just to show that you could quite easily build non-trivial applications. And you know, this has a lot of work to do on the styling, but generally, my experience is it's a lot easier to get to something that looks half decent with this than with QuadWC, where you're setting all the sizes and so on yourself. Here, things can expand automatically, and you can use CSS very flexibly to style things. One of the other things that's worth mentioning about this technology is that when you build web servers, there are automated tools to help you test them. I think John Daintree found this tool a couple of years ago when he was debugging a problem with our IIS. We had a memory leak, I think, that occurred after a very, very long time running an application. And he needed to drive the web server as if there were 100 users banging away at it. And he found this Selenium tool, and we've been using that in the MyServer development group. We built a little tool that we'll be making available to as part of MyServer, I think. So in that user application that I built, I have a reporting function, and I have an automated test script for it here. Init browser. So go to the report 1 page. Set the start period and end period. So all of these HTML controls in MyServer tend to be named. You have to really give them an ID. And so I can set those. I can close that accordion tab, open the next accordion tab, select in this list manager object one of the items, click save. In the combo box down there, click select state, and then in that one, so list manager select is actually a utility function that finds some items and then calls drag and drop. So it's simulating a drag and drop between controls here. Close the tab. Go to this is the part of the UI that I think the customer was least happy about. It's how to define the roll-ups in this reporting. So I'm saying I want my first dimension to be state. I want summary levels, both region and state. I want the second dimension to be product group. Run the report, close that tab, open the report, and it's rendered in a Syncfusion tree grid control. And then I can even do things like here's the expected output. Find the report 1 ID and all the TD objects inside it. Select the first 4 and check that the report has produced the expected result. So that, I think, is really something that people have struggled to do. I know there are people who have managed to create strategies for that using QuadWC. But here, there are really very, very nice tools available. So, I suggest really what you do, if you're interested in this technology, go to myserver.dyalog.com a few days after the user meeting, or search for MyServer on GitHub. We're running this as an open source project and really hoping that people will contribute sample applications, widgets, and so on. And I did mention this in the keynote, and I'd like to just show you very briefly. You've seen this slide already, so here's a demo of a technology we've been experimenting with now. It's not at all the final form of this. We're doing a lot of experience. But so here's a program which is actually it's a web server embedded in a desktop wrapper. So if I navigate to this HTTP address and I say I want a window which is 1000 by 800 position 55, it brings up my application in a seamless container. So I can use this to build what appear to be desktop applications using exactly the same user interface definition. So my application will run on the cloud, on the desktop, on a phone, and so on. So my server is a little bit more than just that set of classes for creating UI. It's also a web server, so it actually listens on TCP and delivers content, and the future version of it will also be able to run in a mode where it embeds this rendering engine and just uses that locally. It can also do web services, so the old SOAR's web service utility will be integrated and also handle what is called RESTful web services without the SOAP technology that's a bit complicated. And it's a framework for multi-user application deployment. And my time is up, so here's the last slide. What we're claiming, the goal of this project has always been that anybody who can write an APL function should be able to write a web application. We think we're now really close. Dan and Adam are going to be presenting more of those lists of controls and widgets in the first talk tomorrow. The goal is to be easy to use for everybody, but extendable without limits by people who want to dig into technology. I think this is really, cool. Personally. Yeah. Well.